Welcome to Cal Talks. This is Marcelo Wallau, Forage Extension Specialist with the University of Florida. And this is our podcast, where we dive into the main topics affecting livestock and forage production in the southeastern United States. Join us in this journey as we tackle the main issues affecting our producers and the sustainability of our production systems. Hello and welcome to Cal Talks. This is Marcelo Wallau, Forage Extension Specialist and Associate Program Leader at the University of Florida. And this is our podcast where we dive deep in the main issues affecting livestock and forage agriculture in the southeastern United States. Today, I have with me Marshall Sewell, and we're here to talk about a very important topic, which is mental health in agriculture. This is a topic that has come up a lot recently in many of our circles and also in our publications, and I thought it would be important to bring to our audience. Marshall is a lifelong agriculturalist raised in his fifth generation fruit and vegetable farm in Plant City. And after some life events, which he's going to share with us here, he co-founded the Mind Your Melon Foundation with his wife to pursue a passion for mental health advocacy. And this organization is dedicated to addressing farm stress and farmer mental health. Marshall, thanks a lot for joining us and taking time in your day to come here.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm happy to be here and happy to have the conversation.
So we always love farming. I mean, both of us grew up in farming, and there is a lot of people interested in farming nowadays because they see farming as that retirement dream because it's so peaceful and we're going to be connected to the land. But we both know that farming is not.
It's not easy. That's right. I say sometimes I think we almost have this Norman Rockwell type mental image of farming, you know, the type that we see in the pictures and the paintings, and everybody wants to do it and it's so peaceful, but then you actually go and you get in the middle of real farming and it's much more difficult than a lot of people sort of romanticize, right? And you've seen that. I've seen that firsthand as well.
Yeah, so we're in a very high stress environment. We are in an open factory where we don't control a lot of our events. And also one of the most worrisome statistics is that farming is one of the most dangerous professions, both in terms of danger in the farm, but also related to the suicide in farm.
Correct.
And that's kind of where your story begins.
For sure. And I don't mind sharing just a little bit with you and the audience. You're right. There are a lot of different factors that already make farming and ranching, agriculture in general, just very difficult. You mentioned a lot of things that are uncertain or out of our control, and that's absolute. We deal with the environment. We deal with the risk of disaster and market volatility, just a lot of unknowns. And yet we still do it because many of us, majority of these operations, they're multi-generational. They've been in our family forever and ever, and we love it, even though, yes, it is stressful. And our family is no different. You mentioned in the introduction that I grew up on my family's fifth generation farm, and something we're very proud of. But over the years, I've come to really realize that when I hear people talking about fifth, sixth, seventh, or even more generation family farm operation or family ranch, not only is that a sense of pride and sense of tradition, but it's a sense of pressure too. You're carrying a lot on your shoulders. And I know that I grew up, and I imagine this will resonate with others as well, and probably even with you, but I grew up hearing that all the time. It was like, I sure wouldn't want to be the one that lost my grandpa's farm, or my great-great-grandparents founded this homestead. I wouldn't want to be the one that lost it. And our family was no different, but grew up in Central Florida. Strawberries were our main crop. Still to this day are a really big primary portion of the family farm operation. And then mixed vegetables in the fall and spring as well. So pretty interesting crop rotation, crop mix, but strawberries were the main thing. And my story really stems from my senior year of high school when I was growing up. And the season started out pretty much like any other, right? I was back in school. It was my senior year. I was excited. And we were getting all of our ground ready. We got berries planted. We were really excited. We were getting ready for this berry season. And we ended up, a lot of growers in the area, in addition to us, we realized that we had received some, I'll call them dirty plants that had come down from a nursery operation. They had disease in them, and these plants ended up dying off before we could harvest anything. So I'll share that for anybody listening. That's just imagine an all-out failure, right? Just a punch in the gut, not understanding what to do next, just hands on your hips, thinking about where to even go, what to do. And that's where we were. We had all of our costs sunk. The crop was out. We weren't expecting any sort of returns at that point, and trying to understand what made sense. And long story made short, you've heard this before, and some of your listeners may have heard it as well, but it was on a Sunday in November. I woke up and thought I was going to go to work with my family, thought I was going to go to work. My dad was going to go work on some equipment, and he had other plans. He told me, he said, you know what, you go off to church with your mom. I'd rather you go there. I said, all right, I'll do it. So I went to church with my mom that day. And at some point during the sermon that day, my dad just made the decision. He turned off his cell phone. He jumped in his truck and he drove south out of town and ended up deciding to take his own life. That turned into our reality, Marcelo. We lost my dad to suicide during that crop failure. And then my mom and my brother and I, along with our grandpa at the time, he was still involved in the operation. We were trying to figure out how to navigate the loss of my dad and the crop failure and trying to think about how to keep this multi-generational business still going. So it was just a lot of cumulative pressures, I guess you could say, all kind of colliding right around the holidays. So, yeah.
I've heard the story, and every time that I hear it, I can only imagine how you feel about it. And you tell the story, you share, and I think it's very, very brave for you to share that with other people. And it really touches me. It really, really, really touches me deep, despite the fact that I know what is going to happen in the story. People think that mental health is cowardice, that it's something that to not be talked about. But actually, is a sign of bravery to face those issues. Why is still such a taboo, and how are you guys working towards changing that and helping people?
First off, I appreciate you even making the comment that you think it's brave. It's something that I don't necessarily know if it's brave, but our family's been deeply convicted that we've seen how much this impacted our family. Through the work of Mind Your Melon, we've gone on to see how mental health and even suicide have had ripple effects in other communities all over the place. And to your point, most of the time it's a subject people don't talk about. And so we feel convicted that one of the best ways to bring something like that out of the shadows or out of the dark is to just drag it into the light. So the more we can talk about it, the more we can open up conversation, dialogue like we're having in here. Hopefully that's an opportunity to actually realize that it doesn't have to be a stigmatized topic, and hopefully help us work towards a future where ideally we have more connection, stronger relationships, more support from others, whether that be professional or peer, and ideally get to a point where we have less and less loss. That's the goal. That's why we feel so convicted, because we've seen how it impacted us. But you asked originally why it's so stigmatized. And I think we've apparently as a society just gotten to this place where we think we have to have it all figured out. We think we have to have it all buttoned up. We certainly wouldn't want people to think that we're weak. We wouldn't want people to think we're crazy. We're supposed to have all the answers. We all hear it, that whole pull ourselves up by the bootstraps type mentality, and we got to just
try and up and go.
That's it. But what we see is, especially in a field like agriculture, and we see it in other industries and other fields too, it's just there's a lot of pressure. And a mentor of mine who actually he's a clinical psychologist, he would refer to it as cumulative stress. It's when you just can't catch a breath. There's just stress. And just when you think you might be getting on the backside of it, then there's more stress. And with farming, that feeling. Just you get through one day and then the next day, there's a whole new set of challenges.
Something else going to break. Marks are going to turn. Crop. There is always something. One of the things that we were discussing before, and I think there's the stigma that mental health equals mental illness,
for sure,
and that we don't want to address that. If I assume that I have a mental health problem, it is a problem. It's an illness, but that's not true.
I would agree. We say often that mental health is not equal to mental illness. If you look at the current statistics, I believe right now they're currently claiming that on average, 1 out of every 4, 1 out of every 5 Americans will at some point in time deal with a mental illness. Within Mind Your Melon, we like to say 100% of us deal with mental health. Would it be different if we referred to it as mental fitness or mental exercise? I mean, if we spun it that way, is it suddenly a little more approachable? Because that's pretty much what it is, knowing that we're dealing with issues every single day, but we all deal with them differently. And hypothetically, we have the ability to try and work towards being more mentally healthy, more mentally fit, in addressing these things. So that's what we're trying to talk about, is just what are ways that we can advocate for more positive, proactive approaches to it. That's it.
We talked a little bit before we start recording today about the mental health, the chemical imbalances, and that's clinical. That's the clinical part. We're going to shy away a little bit from that. But talking about mental health, what are the main topics or stressors you see among farmers most often?
So in terms of the challenges and the stressors that we see, I would just say that, again, big broad stroke bucket would be uncertainty. I think if you really had to take a look at things, and we can talk also about the recent Mind Your Melon Farmer Wellbeing Survey that we conducted. We conducted it last year and we got that data. We looked at some of the key stressors that were found from all the study participants. We had just under around 700 or so participants. But typically, both in that survey and even in other data across the US and other countries, a lot of times it goes back to volatile factors and uncertainty. So natural disaster, weather, environment, market and economics. We see typically towards the top is also policy and regulation, especially when people in agriculture feel like they are being handed policy that they have to adhere to and they don't really feel like they have a say, which interestingly goes back to one of the things that we saw as a top stressor in our survey, which was a lack of public understanding of agriculture. Isn't that odd?
Wow.
And even our research team, when we were looking through that, we were like, of all things to make it to the top, but the more and more we dove into it, and even in follow-up conversations, we found it so striking that it's not just feelings being heard. It's not just a sensitivity to people not understanding. No, it's more so if you look at the climate right now of our modern world and just politicized views, mis and disinformation, food phobias and food myths, things like that. There's this lack of public understanding of what we do in agriculture that sometimes can impact market demand based off of how people vote with their dollars, or that policy and regulation piece that people impact with their legitimate votes.
Wow.
Just a lot of things that would be viewed as kind of out of the control or out of the hands sometimes.
And some of those are completely outside of the farm scenario. I mean, it's really interesting to think. Yeah, I've seen, in not wanting to deviate towards that current political economic scenario, but tension is everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty volatile, and people cannot have conversations. And so conversation. One of the, as we're talking here, we talked about those stressors, about mental health. And one way to deal with that, you said, is the introspect, is just thinking about it.
Yeah, I'm happy to elaborate on that. I think that sometimes to really understand where we're going, we need to understand where we are and where we've been, right? You know, it's like looking at a map or plugging something into our GPS. If you don't know where you're even starting from or where you've been, it's probably difficult to figure out where you're headed to. So I would just use sort of that analogy as we think about this introspection idea, and not trying to use too much technical jargon with that term or anything. But seriously, if you look inwardly when you're going through these issues, really trying to peel back the layers and understand what it is that's bothering you. I think before we started recording, you and I were talking about even just dealing with emotions.
Yeah.
Like it's
simple as that.
We see it with our kids, right?
Yeah.
We're trying to help kids process emotions. We got young children, and even that, it's simple to recognize, oh, I'm mad, or maybe I'm afraid, or something along those lines. But when you can do the introspection and realize what it is that's really causing that, and that's where I think you start diving a little bit deeper into some of the more specific things that might be bothering you personally on an individual level. Because for some people, we might talk mental health, big broad term, but for some people, it's finances and economics. It's the business. That's what's really bothering them day in and day out. For other people, their family might be dysfunctional. They might be dealing with some pretty tough relationships or poor communication breakdown or something along those lines. And then to what we were discussing earlier, you've got others that maybe they legitimately are concerned about physical health and things that they're experiencing with their bodies or what have you. And that can then lead to some of those mental illness type conversations, especially when, you get into your chemical balances and things, which again, we don't necessarily need to get into.
Yeah, that's a whole different scenario. And often also those are consequences of this previous part with this mental health. I like the idea of mental exercise, because it is, as with any muscle, when we exercise and exercise your brain, well, we could go a full podcast talking about exercising your brain here, but thinking about exercising your brain in terms of reflect about those issues and then start decomposing them. So we always think about, okay, mental health, help, psychologist, psychiatrist, okay? But that's not necessary, right? I mean, a friendly conversation can also be a way to cultivate that mental health.
In today's day and age, I would say, I think there's some merit to that. There's probably this misnomer that if I'm struggling, okay, do I need to go and seek out a counselor or something? Some people might need to, and that is a viable option, and there are those resources. But in a lot of scenarios too, people that we've spoken to, sometimes you really just want to have support from a friend, or just be connected with somebody, or know that there's somebody there to help. So I think resources can look differently for so many different people. And as far as, I'll go back to that term exercise, when you're asking about mental exercise, there's another, he's more of a research psychologist. He's not a clinician or anything, but he works specifically in military, and he focuses so much on resilient mindset. And that's what he talks about. There's just so many things that you can do to even try to change your own perspective on things like gratitude rather than going into every single day looking at problems or looking to complain, trying to seek out joy and trying to hone in on those things. Some people, we know full and well, we might need to try and take a break from all the doom scrolling that we do, or we might need to set aside the bottle of beer and the cigarettes. I mean, there are different things that we arguably probably know might have an impact, but sometimes it's just really difficult to break habits.
Well, a lot of those are refuges of our minds. Like, okay, I need a beer, I need a cigarette, I need to scroll down to decompress, and that might not be one of the best ways to do that. I was reading about some projects like the coffee shop project, which was featured in Successful Farming, if I'm not mistaken, a couple of months ago, where basically we're getting people to go to a coffee shop and talk and have some type of help, and some of that is actually through extension services, just there and just have a coffee and talk, and that helps. But as I said, being a friend can mean a lot to people, and we're in a society today that there is statistics, very strong statistics, to show that our number of friends and close friends are approaching zero. In some of the urban societies especially, it is approaching zero, though you don't have a very immediate strong connection. So in those cases, it's very hard to find people. But you as a friend, what are the signs that you can see someone that is going through a path of mental health and that might be needing some help at different stages? Could be something simple as a conversation, or all the way through an intervention.
I want to just sort of roll it back a little bit before I dive into signs and symptoms and things like that. I really want to go back to what you were saying about just being a friend and what we're seeing right now in our world. I was reading a report just recently, and it was pretty much calling out that we were reaching some of the highest levels of isolation and loneliness that we'd ever experienced as a society. And to read that, it's just like, we have more tools than ever at our fingertips to be arguably, I'll use air quotes here for anybody who's listening and not watching, air quotes, connected. But how connected are we really? That friend of mine that I said was a mentor who's a clinical psychologist, I asked him one time, I was like, listen, if you could just give one piece of advice to somebody, what would it be? And Marcelo, what he told me was, I would encourage people to stop and think about who their oh no people are. And by oh no, he said, everybody has an oh no moment. Like, oh no, it's terrible. This is awful. He said, if you don't have at least a couple of people that you know you can call in your oh no moments, that's a really good place to start. And nowadays, if we go back to what we said just a little while ago, we think we need to have it all under control. We want to be independent. We want to do it all ourselves. We doom scroll on our devices and everything, and we want everybody to only see the highlight reels.
Oh, yeah.
We shouldn't have any problems in our life. And we suddenly find ourselves in this world where we're sort of disconnecting more and more from real meaningful relationships. And I'll stand on a soapbox and say, I think just because we got a pile of friends on Facebook doesn't necessarily mean we have a bunch of really intentional, meaningful relationships. So I go back to what you're saying about the coffee shop project. This idea of really being intentional and really spending time with people, having real conversations, real connection, that I think starts getting into sort of an adjacent topic, which is more social capital, social cohesion, which I'm a huge fan of.
Yeah.
Huge fan of. I think that gets back to almost full circle of where we were decades and generations ago of having real community, people to support one another, not having to do it all yourself, being able to lend a helping hand. But I went off on a little bit of a tangent. I didn't mean to.
No, that's fantastic info.
I'll bring it all the way back because you were asking about, all right, we are a friend. I've got some oh-no people, right? And I'm talking to them and I'm seeing things and suddenly I'm concerned. What would those types of things be? There's textbook, and I want to preface that by saying this, there's plenty of things you can read about when you see or recognize some sort of a major shift in somebody's attitude or their actions. Like if somebody's normally just really well kept, like they dress well, clean shaven, super neat, super clean, good hygiene, and all of a sudden that shifts, or vice versa. Maybe if all of a sudden next thing you know, they're dressing to the nines, like they've got a super fancy outfit on, really dressed up. And again, might not have anything to do with the outfits per se, but just when you see a big switch, or even personality wise, somebody who's usually a little bit calmer, quieter, a little more reserved, and next thing you know, they're wild. They're wanting to go do something crazy, and they're wanting to do. And again, flip side, if you see a shift the other way, typically they're super gregarious, really outgoing, really talkative, and now they're quiet. You're not hearing from them as much. That's probably a good time just to check in on your friend and ask them, hey, notice something. What's going on? Can you talk to me a little bit? That kind of thing. And those are just sort of generics. Again, I'll go back and say that's kind of textbook. And the reason I refer to it as textbook is I know that in hindsight, there weren't really major symptoms or major signs that I'd call out with my dad. My family and I have talked about this. We knew my dad was stressed. We knew we were dealing with issues at the farm, but any just super huge glaring signs didn't really have a whole lot to make note of. And so what we end up advocating for is just try to make it good practice to reach out and connect with people, your loved ones, your family, your friends, people who are meaningful to you. Be reaching out and checking in on them just in general, just as a routine thing, because I think it actually ends up paying dividends in the long run for both parties. It reinforces that person that you're checking in on, that you care, but also it reinforces the relationship that they have with you as well. So you're building your support network.
Wow. Let me ask you the hardest question. It's easy to point out on others. How do we recognize that in ourselves, that we're going into a path?
It's not good.
Yep.
Most people don't want to admit it.
No, if you don't want to admit it.
And the people I've talked to who have come up to me and just shared like, hey, when I finally got to the point that I realized I did want to do something different, I did want to seek help, or I wanted to change some of my lifestyle or my habits. Like it's so interesting to hear those perspectives or to hear from people, but it does take a lot of vulnerability. Nobody likes that word, right? No, and that's a bad word to most people, but there's a whole lot of vulnerability that goes into really just being that open and honest with yourself. But I do think it takes that. The gentleman that I've referenced a couple of times already, his name's Dr. Grant. That's the one I'm talking about, the clinical psychologist. He and I have talked about this at length before, and he puts it really well too. And he even says that typically a good question to ask yourself is how much you're liking your new normal. Like really think about your new normal. If you're waking up in the morning and you're dreading the day, or going to bed at night and you're dreading the day to come, if you're staying anxious feeling, if you see that you're turning to all sorts of things, whether it is some of those not so great coping mechanisms, alcohol, drugs, doom scrolling, whatever that may be, if you see yourself turning to those types of things, you're seeing relationship or communication breakdown, all that to say, when whatever your current normal is, when it doesn't feel so normal, or you're finally getting to the point where you're like, man, this is alarming. That's when it's probably time to really stop and reevaluate some things that are going on. We use this expression sometimes, Taylor and myself and the folks at Mind Your Melon. We'll talk about when you're getting your truck stuck or your tractor stuck or something like that. It's like most of the time, what we end up wanting to do is we're like, well, the truck feels like it's getting stuck. I'll just mat the gas. I'll keep going and I bet I can get out of it. And what happens?
Just dig deeper.
You usually dig it deeper, right? Sometimes you're better off in the long run if you just stop and say, okay, should I jump out and lock in the hubs? Should I go ahead and put it in 4-wheel drive? Should I go ahead and call a tow truck? What should I do? What kind of help do I need? Sometimes we've got to do that as an individual rather than just mat the gas and keep on going and pouring fuel to the fire. Sometimes we need to pause and say, I might need to do something a little different.
Yeah, that's very interesting. You talk about vulnerability, and I really like the work from Brené Brown.
Oh, yeah.
And she takes a lot of courage to be vulnerable.
Yes.
Takes a lot of courage. So just to wrap up, I want to talk a little bit about your work and the Mind Your Melon Foundation and all that. How does the foundation work? What it is? How can people reach out? And also, I really want to know, people who want to engage and help, how can they do that?
So a couple of layers to that. First, I'll just share real quick. Mind Your Melon is our family foundation that we started to advocate on the topic. You mentioned that earlier on in the introduction. We're a 501c3. We have a board of people from all throughout the agricultural natural resources field. We wanted to bring on a bunch of different perspectives, people who have different areas of expertise, but who have also been through their own sets of experiences. We have specifically looked and recruited people who have their own tie to the topic. Either they've witnessed a loved one who's gone through struggles, they themselves have struggled, they've struggled possibly with their own health-related concern or even a business-related concern that was highly stressful. Somehow or another, there's a tie back to the topic. We wanted to bring together a bunch of diverse perspectives to help lead the charge in terms of steering the work that we do. Now, as far as the outreach, we began by wanting to really, going back to that idea of just trying to drag this into the light, we wanted to raise awareness. We knew that there were plenty of people struggling, and yet doing it silently, avoiding these conversations. So we really wanted to try and normalize the conversation to begin. That's how we got started. Then we wanted to make sure that moving forward, any resources that we were either developing or sharing, we want to make sure that they were evidence-based and relevant. That's why we participated in the partnership with University of Florida and with Florida Farm Bureau to develop that farmer wellbeing survey, collect the primary data, and then use that to actually steer some of the work that we're moving into doing now. And currently what we're doing is we're in the process of developing some new resources while also working to partner with other organizations who are already providing resources to try and make sure that we're sharing things that are relevant to the ag space. If anybody wants to learn more about that, they can go to mindyourmelon.org. That's our website. We're on most social media channels as Mind Your Melon. It's got all of our contact information on there. If anybody ever wants to message or reach out, feel free. We're always happy to have a conversation, lend a listening ear. And as far as help, I'll say, again, if you go back to some of the things that we've talked about, like if somebody's really doing the introspection and they're willing to be vulnerable and they're trying to think about what might be helpful, I think spending some time thinking about what type of help they need and then understanding that there are different types of resources. Financial resources are very different from clinical resources. For anybody needing specifically clinical help, or if they're concerned themselves with being at risk, or if they have a loved one who might be at risk, always want to point out the 988 hotline is a resource. Text or call them 24/7 anytime. It's available in multiple languages. You can get a hold of somebody who can either talk you through any sort of an issue that you're experiencing, and they can also give you help if you're trying to find the right ways to support somebody who's in need as well, if a family member, friend, loved one. And so that's always a resource. I would also encourage, jotted these down, I'll share NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, and then SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration. Those are two leading voices as well as far as the actual more clinical side, mental illness side. I'd encourage those as well.
Fantastic. We'll put the information for all those organizations and links and numbers on the description of this podcast to help folks understand this better. And you also have a podcast, right?
We do. Marcelo, we've worked on quite a few different projects. So we've got the podcast. That was something that we started early on, and we wanted to just elevate voices. We realized that there were so many people who were going through their own experiences, and rather than feeling like they couldn't share them, we wanted to try and provide a platform for them to tell those stories. And then on the other side of that, it was kind of two-pronged. We wanted to make sure and bring on people who might be viewed as helpful resources. So whether that's somebody to come on and talk about financial planning, succession and estate planning, or somebody like a clinician to talk about legitimately navigating stress and mental health. And so just a wide variety of topics that all kind of go back to resilient mindsets, healthy approaches, farm life, all of those things. But yes, that's the Mind Your Melon podcast, and it can be found on most of the podcast channels, Spotify, Apple. So yeah, we're there.
No, it's important. I think that goes back to when you share and you hear people sharing, you realize that's not a problem to share and to talk about it. And I think it helps with that coping process.
Oh, yeah.
So pretty good. Marshall, really appreciate you coming here today. It's a very different topic from what we are used to in this podcast, which is always forages and cattle and production. But it is a topic that I bet affect all of us to some extent.
Oh, yeah.
We may not recognize, we may not think it's important, but it does affect probably every single family.
For sure.
1 in 5 has mental illness issue once in a life, but everybody will probably have some mental health concerns
for sure
in a lifetime. Appreciate you coming today. It was fantastic talking to you, learning more about the story. It's a sad story, and as I mentioned before, it's important to share and brave to share because that can really make differences and can really help people.
Thank you very much for the time. Appreciate it.
Thank you. And don't forget to check our other podcasts, Forge Nexus and the other episodes, and the Cal Talks podcast as well. Keep an eye on our updates on social media, and if you have any questions, or ideas, or comments to share with us, send us an email at forages@ifas.ufl.edu. I'll see you in the next Cal Talks podcast. This podcast was brought to you by the University of Florida Forage Team with technical support from the University of Florida College of Agriculture and Life Sciences, Faculty Instructional Resource and Support Team. This episode was produced by Marcelo Wallau, Olivia Mowley, and Ashley Kanabrowski. We hope you have enjoyed this podcast. If you have any comments or thoughts to share with us, please reach out to us through our email, forages@ifas.ufl.edu, and find us on our social media, uf.forages on Instagram, UF Forage Team on Facebook, or UF IFAS Forages on YouTube. We hope to see you in our next episode.